What's up, duelists? Now, I am Edison guy, right? Like, that's my archetype. I am Edison guy. So, obviously, as Edison guy, I get the question all the time. Keegan, yo, what if you could add one thing to Edison? What would you add? If you could add stuff to Edison or take stuff away from Edison, what would you add or take away? Now, this video is primarily going to be focusing on what I would add, quote unquote, but the actual answer to that question is nothing. I think the format is really good as it is. I think if I were to add things, it wouldn't necessarily make the format better or worse. It would just add another layer of depth to the format, and that's pretty much it. But I think as the format is right now, in terms of like adding stuff to it, if you want to add stuff to it with your friends and play like complex formats like that just to see how things are, that's cool and all, but I think the format is pretty much as close to perfect as it's gonna get for Yu-Gi-Oh! In general, I don't think there really is another Yu-Gi-Oh! Format that kind of hits all the boxes, checks all the boxes, as well as Edison format does, where it has like least amount of busted spell cards, most amount of effort put into winning most of your games, and like also like how much the skill of like the fundamental skill of playing this game actually matters in Edison format versus other formats where it's like maybe you're just memorizing how to hand trap certain combos, or you're just trying to draw the out to certain things, or you're just hoping your opponent doesn't FTK you with Mass Driver, that kind of thing. So I think Edison format is already as close to perfect as possible. I just want to get that on the table. But you know what? I picked out 10 cards that I think could make Edison format more interesting. If you just want to do something a little bit more complex with your friends, around a game night or whatever, or if you just want to like add these cards to your cube to sort of experiment and see what it would be like. I mean, the cool thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! Is there's lots of years after Edison that we can kind of postulate and speculate on these types of things. So I want to get out of the way my honorable mentions, because there are a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards that I think could be kind of cool in Edison format, could be kind of interesting in Edison format. The first honorable mention is Crevice into the Different Dimension. This card is really neat. There's actually not that many ways to interact with the graveyard in Edison format. I think it's like Fiend Comedian, Big Burn, Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, Soul Release, DD Crow, and that's it. I'm not really sure. There's not that many ways to interact with the graveyard, and I feel like this is a cool card that can help interact with like Vayu. It can help interact with Treeborn Frog. It can help interact with Lightsworn or Fairies or whatever. It can also banish stuff from your own graveyard to set up for cards like Guardian Iados. We could see it have multifaceted applications. I think this is a cool card, and it would increase the depth of skill in Edison format, and it would also increase the level of interactivity with like a bunch of different decks. Another honorable mention, I think I have 6 or 7 honorable mentions because it was hard to pick just 10. It was hard to pick just 10. Breakthrough Skill is a card that I think is really well designed. It's a very fair card. This would be a natural buff to Lightsworns, giving them a way to deal with like stuff that's in play, giving them issues, negating their effects, stuff like maybe Stardust Dragon or Christia, stuff that could be stopping the Lightsworn player from playing. But you could also play this in other decks. Anything that can discard this from the hand, you can get extra value later on. It would help balance stupid things like Dupe Frog or Vanity's Fiend or Christia, or even Banisher of the Radiant, stuff like that. It could help you deal with like certain Floodgate monsters that are otherwise pretty annoying in this format. Kawakimaru Drago comes to mind as well. I think this would help like balance the format out against those big Floodgate monsters, because I've noticed that those monsters have a huge impact on whether or not your deck has good matchups or not. Another honorable mention is Flame Tiger. I think this card is really cool. I think this would be a really good buff to Flamvels specifically, but you could also play this in like certain Monarch strategies. I think this is just a really well designed card. You give up your draw, but you get a special summon a monster. So it's like a Treeborn Frog that you have to pay a very real price for, but when you draw it, it's not as miserably pathetic as Treeborn Frog. You can actually summon it, and it can actually offer you value as an 1800 attacking monster. It's a Fire Dog target. It can help improve certain things. It's a Rekindling target as well, I think. Is that how Rekindling works? No, Rekindling has to have 200. Fire Dog doesn't. I think Fire Dog is 200 or less. Let me double check this. Yeah, 200 or less. So if it's a Fire Dog target, it's not a Rekindling target, but it's a cool card, and I think this is a card that would increase the depth of Edison format. It would probably see some amount of play. It's a sweet card. I like it a lot. Okay, next card on honorable mentions, Wind Up Rabbit. I think this card is just such a cool card design, because I love cards that blink. It reminds me of like Etherling from Magic. It reminds me of that type of thing, Restoration Angel, those types of effects. I feel like that's an effect that's kind of lost in Edison format. It's an effect we don't really have a great version of. Now, there's another card on my list that has a pseudo blink effect that's actually in my top 10 list. So that's why I elected to put Wind Up Rabbit in the honorable mentions, because the other card kind of does what Wind Up Rabbit does, but it also fixes some other issues with the format. Wind Up Rabbit's just a cool card. I think it's one of those like really fun cards to play with and to play against. It makes you scratch your head and try to figure things out, figure out how you can get value out of it, figure out how you can't get value out of it, that sort of thing. I like it a lot. Okay, another honorable mention would be Archfiend Cavalry. I think this card would open up an entire archetype. It would open up a deck that doesn't already exist in Edison format, but could potentially exist if it had one or two more pieces of support. And that'd be like a more Archfiend focused deck. Now, Archfiends already have like a lot of really good support. I mean, they have Falling Down, which is a themed Snatch Steal. This card's very good. They have a few other cards that go well in the deck as well. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but this card would help you like just improve that type of deck. This card does a pretty good job sitting where it's sitting in Edison format, because a lot of times people will set Hamster or Raikou, and this card does a very good job attacking into both of those monsters, which I like about it a lot. It's a dark, which is awesome. It's 1900 attack, which means it gets over everything that isn't Sirocco or Cyber Dragon or like Dupe Frog, I guess. The effect is really cool. If it's destroyed by card effect, you get a special summon Archfiend from your graveyard. That includes my favorite boss monster from early Yu-Gi-Oh, Summon Skull. Before Jinzo was printed, Summon Skull was my favorite card. So you could bring him back off the Archfiend Cavalry. Do some cool stuff, like build a Summon Skull themed deck with this guy in it as your like secondary option to bring him back. That would be really sick to me. But obviously that's more of a personal pick. It's not really something that would naturally, like adding another deck to Edison format or another like whatever tier C deck to Edison format wouldn't really change it all that much. And he only would go in decks that play Archfiends. So again, he didn't make my top 10 list. And then my last card for top 10 list is actually Fabled Cerberus. Or not top 10 list, sorry. Honorable mentions, Fabled Cerberus. The reason he didn't make my top 10 list is I think he might be too broken for Edison format. I think his effect is too strong. I think it would be interesting to see what people would do with Fabled Cerberus, but ultimately this card would just like make certain cards like Zombie Master, Lumina just all of a sudden insanely powerful. Bryonic even would get a significant level up from having Fabled Cerberus in the format. You'd bounce something, you'd be able to special him, and then you'd be able to keep comboing. I think if you like combo decks, this could be an interesting inclusion to sort of like mix things up. But ultimately, I think this card would be a little bit too powerful, and that's why I didn't include him in my top 10 list. My top 10 list focuses a lot on things that I don't think would break the format, but it would shake the format up, and it would also sort of remove some of the issues with the format. That's kind of what I'm looking at with the cards that I think would alter Edison for the better. Keep in mind, like, there are other cards too. There are other cards. I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh's been printing stuff for like the last like 13 years. So there's 13 years of cards to look through that. There's, I think, hundreds, at least thousands, maybe even of cards that could potentially be added to the format for funsies that could shake things up quite a bit. All right, let's go ahead and get into the top 10 list. Number 10, this is the one that everyone picks, Scrap Dragon. And this is the one I'm the most hesitant to put on this list, just because I think Scrap Dragon is a little too powerful for Edison format as it is. I already think Dark End Dragon is too powerful for Edison format, but it's widely agreed upon to play with this card, and he is legal in OTS Time Wizard 2010 tournaments. So we kind of just have to run with it. But I think this card is a little bit too powerful as it is. Scrap Dragon is Dark End Dragon, but you can summon it a lot more easy. And also it can pop things that are like not monsters. So it's pretty insane. Not only that, it boasts better stats than Dark End. After popping, Dark End goes to 21. Scrap Dragon is 2800. And it also gives a significant boost to like some decks that could potentially be too much. I feel like it could potentially make Flamvel too good, or it could potentially make Debris decks too good. This card is really, really disgusting in later formats. It's one of the premier synchros in the following formats: Tengu Plants, and I forget the other formats after. But Scrap Dragon's like, it's one of the most powerful synchros, most versatile synchros in those formats. So I'm a little hesitant to add it to the list. But ultimately, it is a synchro monster. You still have to work to summon it. It still does run you into Royal Oppression. If there's no other scrap monsters, you're never really getting value out of it. So it's potentially fine. I think another thing that I like about Scrap Dragon, which is another thing that I like about most of the cards that I'm adding to this list, is that it powers up every deck equally. So instead of just powering up one deck more than others, even though yes, it does give a slight boost to Flamvel, you can put it in every extra deck, and that way everyone kind of gets to play on equal footing. Whereas I'm not just like adding a card that like makes Blackwings like super insane, or makes Flamvel super insane, or makes Zombie super insane. It kind of goes into all the decks. Basically, the only deck that really doesn't get to capitalize off of this, funnily enough, is like Frogs, because they don't really synchro summon to begin with, but they could. The thing is like all of a sudden, you add some level 2 tuners into your deck, you can make Scrap Dragon pretty easily. Maybe that's pretty good. It's a good way to take advantage of your Treeborn coming back every turn. I don't know. Maybe it develops a new interesting Frog Synchro deck. Okay, number 9 on my list is a card that's actually banned in Edison format, and that's Tsukiyomi. I would actually like to see this card off the ban list at 3. Now, I know you guys are thinking Tsukiyomi is busted. This is kind of what I was talking about as a card that blinks, pseudo blinks, instead of Wind Up Rabbit. But instead of Wind Up Rabbit, I actually think Tsukiyomi fixes a lot of the issues with the format. You guys are probably thinking, okay, Keegan, but what if someone goes first and they open Raiko, and then they have Tsukiyomi, and then they just get you in a Raiko Tsukiyomi lock? Yes, that is good. That is really insane. And yes, the person going first with Raiko is one of the issues with the format. However, with Tsukiyomi at 3, it means you could more reliably main deck Nobleman of Crossout. So it means that going second all of a sudden is significantly less bad, because Nobleman of Crossout with Tsukiyomi is just a 1-for-1 banish anything. Whereas before, you'd be forced to combine it with Book of Moon if your opponent chooses not to set a monster, or if your opponent's playing an aggro deck like Blackwings or Glads. I also think Tsukiyomi does a very good job at balancing Blackwings, which is one of the better decks in the format. It also helps versus cards like Archlord Christia, which are problem cards in the format. It helps versus cards like Vanity's Fiend. Helps versus cards like Absolute Zero. It helps versus a lot of the like top end threats. It gives you kind of a cool, interesting, interactive way to sort of deal with that. It's a dark monster. It's a spellcaster. It can help you make Arcanite if you can somehow special summon a 3-star tuner in the same turn, or if you've set it or something and you've figured out a way to get it flipped face up. I don't know. It's a cool card. I think it would add a lot of depth to the format. It would see play in almost every single deck. I think it would not necessarily break anything. There aren't too many cards besides maybe Mask of Darkness where you could create infinite resource locks, Dekoichi to a degree. But I think as far as like power level goes, I think it's absolutely balanced. It gets stopped by Pulling the Rug. It gets stopped by Trap Hole, Torrential. All of the like common trap cards deal with it. So I think it's not that big of an issue in the format. And I think it would actually balance the turn 1 plays in the format a lot. Like if your opponent goes like turn 1, Black Whirlwind, summon a Blackwing monster, you could summon Tsukiyomi, book their monster, attack over it, that kind of thing. Or you could reliably play Nobleman of Crossout in your deck if you're playing Tsukiyomi, which is something I think the format kind of lacks, is a way to interact with the turn 1 set monster reliably. Okay, next card on the list is Ninja Grandmaster Hanzo. This is a card that I love. I think it's such a cool card design because while it does give you a +1, it's kind of more just like a flexible like tutor. The only ninjutsu card we have in Edison format is the Art of Transformation. So instead of him like giving you a raw +1, I mean it is a raw +1 if you think about it that way. You can grab the ninjutsu Art of Super Transformation. It kind of just like sacrifices your Hanzo later on to level him up into a bigger monster. And it's ultimately like quote unquote 1-for-1 unless you find a conversion for ninjutsu art. Yes, this card would ultimately power up Blackwings a little bit more than it should, but I think Ninja Grandmaster Hanzo would also open up the doors for a lot of cool decks to see play, like Dark Samorg, or it would even be a boost to Insect decks or Beast decks, Beast Down, Baboon style decks, because this can grab not only Winged Beast monsters, but Insect monsters and Beast monsters. My biggest concern with this card, and adding it to my top 10 list, is that it does make Blackwings a little bit too powerful. I think that you could easily not include this, or you could include this and see like a Blackwing tier 0 format, because Hanzo plus ninjutsu art into Dark Samorg or into other Blackwing monsters or whatever could be too powerful. It could be too powerful. But I think this card is a fun card to play with. It adds a lot of depth to the format. It adds potentially new combo decks, new decks that we haven't seen before. It adds some cool stuff to the format that could be pretty interesting. Also, 1800 Dark Warrior, like level 4. Come on, like that's it's just great. You could throw it in anything pretty much. Okay, next card on the list that I think will be fun to have is Dark Hole at 3. I think, again, a lot of the issues in the format come with like my opponent set a hamster turn 1 and I just didn't have a great way to attack into it, and they cascaded their turn 1 advantage. So I think Darkhold does a pretty good job of answering that. And I also think Darkhold does a pretty good job of just like reliably answering cards like Archer Christia, Vanity's Fiend, Duplock, that kind of thing. Stuff that people primarily complain about in this format, Darkhold does a good job of answering. And you notice Darkhold, I think, is incredibly balanced in this format because Starlight Road exists and Stardust Dragon exists. So there's a lot of ways to play around it. And oftentimes when people are committing a lot into the board, they're going for game anyway. So I think Darkhold would create a cool kind of like balance. It would make cards like Battle Fader a little bit better. It would make cards like Threatening Roar a little bit better because you could combo it with Dark Hole to sort of like stop an OTK push. It would create a much more like balanced format as opposed to like OTK style formats. Like decks like Dragon Turbo get a lot worse when Dark Hole is printed. Yes, they can summon out Prime Material Dragon, but that forces them to summon out Prime Material Dragon. You get what I'm saying? That kind of stuff is interesting. It's interesting for sure. I think Dark Hole's a cool card. I think it's pretty balanced. Again, I put removal spells at more balanced than like negates or basically stuff that is like a powerful floodgate monster, floodgates, negates, that kind of stuff. I think removal spells are when the removal spells are better than the floodgates or the negates or whatever, the format is inherently better. And that's why Edison is such a good format already, because we have a lot of premier removal that's very good, which is like Raiko, Caius, D-Prison, Bottomless, that kind of stuff. Those are the best cards in the format. And when the removal is the best cards in the format, like Dark Hole, Tsukiyomi, Scrap Dragon, all of a sudden your format becomes a lot more balanced, a lot more fair. It's a lot more about your fundamentals and playing for positioning than it is about what powerful cards you summon. So Dark Hole adds to that. The next card on the list is a personal pick. It's Ghost Ship. I think this card would power up the fairy deck a lot. It would give you a lot of grave control. It would give you easy access to Ancient Sacred Wyvern, which is one of the coolest synchro monsters in the format. You could special summon out Ghost Ship, normal summon the Herald of Orange Light, and then go for an Ancient Sacred Wyvern for game a lot more consistently. I think being able to banish one light monster from your graveyard to summon it makes him a little bit more easy to summon than Soul of Purity and Light. He gives you easy Black Rose access. I like this card a lot. I think this is one of those cards that could see play in a lot of different areas. It could see play in like light beatdown decks, or it could see play in Light Sworn even, or it could see play in like just like swarm decks, like decks that are looking to like Raiko mill some cards, and then you could banish your Raiko special Ghost Ship for extra damage or for a big synchro turn. I think this is one of the cooler cards that comes from later in the game's release. I think it has a lot of niche application. It's not breaking the format wide open like Scrap Dragon potentially is, but it is adding a layer of dexterity and play and speed to those decks that I think could be really fun to experiment with. Now, if we are imagining all of these cards getting added all at once, I think Ghost Ship is cool too, with stuff like Dark Hole floating around. It gives you a good way to come back from being Dark Hole because you can summon two monsters. Like, let's say you go for a baby push where it's like two monsters attack for like 4,000, and then the next turn you can go for Ghost Ship plus another monster attack for game after you get Dark Hold. So it allows aggro to kind of keep pace with some of the removal options that I've added to this list. Okay, that's my number, what was it, number 6? I don't remember. Yeah, number 5, Thousand Eyes Restrict. Now, I'm not sure if I would want this to come back at 1 or at 3, but the primary reason I will want this card to come back at all is because of Instant Fusion. This is pretty much the best way you have to summon it, I think, in the format. It's just a 1-card summon Thousand Eyes Restrict. I think this is such a cool pseudo removal spell because I think it's pretty balanced. You pay 1,000 life points, right? You get your Thousand Eyes Restrict out. You steal their monster, which is pretty nuts. Now, unless you can get your Thousand Eyes Restrict off of the board, you can't actually attack that turn. So you'd have to also be able to sacrifice it for something. Now, this could be too powerful in decks like Frogs, where they're looking to like steal your monster and then sack the Thousand Eyes for Vanity's Fiend all in the same turn. That could be a little bit oppressive. But at the same time, I think it's interesting because it doesn't power up like a lot of other Synchro OTK decks, because it's very difficult to Synchro off with Thousand Eyes unless you have at least 2 other monsters in play. So it kind of creates that sort of thing. And if you can go for like a big Synchro turn, Instant Fusion is already giving you access to like Arcanite or whatever as it is. So I think Thousand Eyes Restrict at 1, potentially 3 could be balanced. Now, another thing I'm not certain about is if you could bring it back with Tsukiyomi. That might be a little bit too powerful, but it might not be. I'm not sure. I think Thousand Eyes Restrict is one of those cards that like leads to a more controlled, slower pace of game that I tend to enjoy. I think back and forth is fun in Yu-Gi-Oh! I think Thousand Eyes restricting, no pun intended or no whatever, you get what I'm saying. Restricting everybody's ability to attack is balanced because it not only restricts your opponent's ability to attack, but your own as well. So I think Thousand Eyes Restrict would be a cool addition to the format. Yes, I know it could easily be abused with like Limit Reverse, Call of the Haunted, that kind of thing after you've instant fusioned it out, but it creates kind of a build around situation, which I think is pretty fun. I think that'd be kind of cool for the format. Maybe too powerful, maybe not, but something to consider. Obviously, none of these changes are going to happen. Again, like I said at the beginning of the video, I think Edison format's kind of as perfect as it can be, but these are cards that I think would be fun to like if you and your friends wanted to just like play like a custom format. I think these 10 cards would make Edison format a little bit more interesting if you just need something to mix up your daily dose of Edison. The next card I have on the list is actually Double Cyclone. I really like this card. I think this card could instantly slot into a ton of really fun decks, most notably the Gear Town decks, the Kuraz decks. I think this would do a great job bolstering up those decks, making them more fun to play, making them more consistent, making them more aggressive, and just like it's just such a cool ability to be able to pop your own Gear Town and then pop your opponent's back row. Or maybe you would use Fiendish Chain or Call of the Haunted or Limit Reverse or something along those lines. Your own Royal Oppression. You could pop your own Royal Oppression, pop your opponent's back row. I think this card could be really cool. I think having extra copies of Space Typhoon that have a little bit of a restriction, a little bit of a build around factor could be really fun in Edison format. Sure, it might make some decks a little bit too powerful to have too many copies of it, but I still think it'd be a really interesting card. I mean, we already have Dust Tornado. We already have, what's that other card? We already have Twister. We already have Nobleman of Extermination. So I feel like Double Cyclone is like, it's a step up from those cards for sure. And it could create some really cool interactions or broken interactions. But I think it'd be really fun to play with in the format personally. Obviously, not for everyone. Some people like heavy back row formats for some fucking reason, but not me. Not me. I like being able to play on multiple different axes, not just on the back row as well. The next card I have on here is Tribe Infecting Virus, a GOAT format all-star. I would actually like to see this card come to 2 or 3. I think this card would balance a lot of the issues with the format. Again, remove Floodgate monsters. Not only that, but I think this card does a pretty good job at reversaling Blackwing decks specifically. I think this would be a fun card to have against those strategies. Yes, obviously it's countered by Starlight Road pretty fucking hard. It's countered by Stardust Dragon pretty hard. It would alter the dynamic of the format, but like I said, having better removal is usually better for the health of the format, and I think Tribe Infecting Virus is ultimately a fair card because it just it can convert your dead cards into live cards, and it's destroying stuff that's already gotten value. Basically, it's destroying stuff that's already gotten to battle phase or gone to attack or whatever. I think it's a pretty fair card. It helps you come back from losing positions. I always think comeback cards are fun to have in the format, especially when they're pretty balanced. Like Tribe Infecting Virus. I think Tribe Infecting Virus is a balanced card, but that's just me. It's like a Snipe Hunter, but guaranteed. That's how I see it, and I think that type of effect could be really fun in Edison format. Yes, it could be abused with Volcanic Shell. Yes, it could be abused with a bunch of other stuff, but like I said, counters to it exist. Starlight Road exists. Bottomless Trap Hole exists. That type of stuff. I think you can make Stardust Dragon pretty easily. It's a weak enough monster. You could run it over with Shura or Flamvell Fire Dog, so it's a liability to leave in play. I think it's one of those cards that would be totally fine for Edison format, honestly. I think it would be totally legit, especially if you have stuff like Tsukiyomi to help balance its existence, more or less. Okay, what was that? That was number 3? Wow, kind of breezing through this list. I got to stall a little bit more so I can get some... No, I'm just kidding. If you guys like this type of thing, go ahead and leave a comment below. Oh, I was going to ask this at the beginning of the video. I totally forgot. Leave a comment below what you would want to add to Edison format, because honestly... I like reading it. I like reading it. Obviously, it's never gonna happen, but it's cool to speculate. You know, it can be fun. It can be fun to hypothesize what it would look like. Okay, number 2 on the list. Number 2 is also number 39. Utopia. I think this card is awesome. This card would be such a cool buff to the format. Now, I was thinking about Gladiator Beast Esadari, right? I was thinking about this card because like this was one of the cards, the first cards that I thought about adding to this list. But then I actually thought about it and I was like, fuck Gladiator Beast. Like why do I want to add something specifically for Gladiator Beast? I could add something for everybody. And that's why I thought number 39 Utopia would be the best add here. This is one of the coolest cards ever printed, in my opinion. He is one of the most badass looking warriors. He reminds me of Digimon. I don't know why. He just looks like a Digimon. He has cool art design. He looks like Blade Knight, but like on steroids. He's got the wings. He's got the swag. He's got the hero vibes. 2500 stats, really strong. 2 level 4 monsters, really powerful. This would be a buff to stuff like gadgets. This would be a buff to stuff like Gladiator Beasts even, because you could overlay your 2 really shitty monsters into something that actually matters, into something people actually care about and want to see, instead of like, ugh, gross, Gladiator Beast Equest, get that shit out of my face. You know what I'm saying? Utopia is actually a Giga Chad monster, and he basically does what Esadari does for the format, but he does it for more decks, which I really like. The fact that he's light is really cool. You can pump him up with Honest. His ability is actually really strong, negate the attacks, and I think he's balanced because once you've negated the 2 attacks, he does become kind of a fragile little glass boy. So yeah, I really like number 39 Utopia. I think this era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Was spoiled by cards that weren't the Xyz monsters. Leviathan, I think Levier kind of is too broken, but Leviathan, Utopia, Gachi, those 3 cards are pretty cool to me. They're cool card design. I think they're very balanced. I think they could make a format more fun if they are included. And I elected to pick Utopia because he's the one that doesn't help out like anything super broken. Like I don't want to see Agent of Creation Venus summon Gachi in Edison format. I'm sorry, I don't. I think that's cringe. I think that's really boring. And I think having triple Christia with that might be too powerful. But I think having something like Utopia in the format could help bring up some of the decks that are lower tier, make them more competitive. And it goes in just about everything. It makes mind control better, brain control better, all that stuff. Great card. Super cool card. And then my number 1 pick for Edison format is a card I really wish I could play in this format. Like, this is like one of those cards that is just Peepo Pog. It's Cherry and Mado. This is my number 1 pick. This is what I would like if I had to add, if I had to, gun to my head, I had to add 1 card to Edison format. I'd pick Cherry and Mado. Free him. Free my boy Cherry and Mado. Let him go. He did nothing wrong. I love this card so much. There's a cool deck I have from later on that plays Mystic Tomato and Cherry and Mado, and it plays Skill Drain. And I think that is such a fun deck because you get to play this sort of Deep Sea Diva, quote unquote, but it's not affected by Skill Drain, which is super dope. I think this card is awesome. He's kind of like a Deep Sea Diva. He's kind of like a Telekinetic Power Well, but he's a plant for starters, so he powers up Mark of the Rose, making your plant synchro decks a lot more fun. He has to be destroyed by battle, so he's a little bit more balanced than those other 2 cards. You can crash him, of course, and then go grab the other 2, use Mark of the Rose after that. Or you can go grab the regular in Mado, make a 5-star synchro, main phase 2. He's a very balanced card. He's not very assuming. He's just out here trying to live his life, you know, and I feel like he would be a really fun addition to Edison format. Anyway, these are my top 10. I think that some of these have the potential to ruin the format, but at the end of the day, we can't really change the format as it stands unless we want to do something super custom. If you build your cube, these are cards to consider for your cube maybe. If you guys want to play for fun with your friends and add some new cards to the format, I feel like these 10 would make it very interesting. And of course, I hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you in the next vid. Peace.